What's up, and welcome to another edition of the Cover 2 Recap. I'm BruinSportsPort.com publisher Edward Lewis. As always, this is Ryan Karchi, the UCLA beat writer for the OC Register. We're here tonight at the Rose Bowl, where UCLA just beat number 12 ranked Arizona, 17-7. And Ryan, big win for UCLA, much needed win, but also an ugly win. Tell me about tonight and what you thought of the game.
Well, this was a win that only a mother could love. I mean, we're talking in the first half, UCLA had 98 penalty yards. At that point, Arizona only had 103 total yards. So that really set the tone, I feel like, in terms of watching this game. It was hard to watch. I mean, both quarterbacks played pretty poorly. UCLA kind of got its run game going with Brett Hundley, and that was a big difference. But Arizona's run game looked terrible. Neither offense really seemed to find any rhythm at all, and that's a credit to both defenses especially. But this is one of those games you just get out of, and you're happy that it's over. And it seems kind of like a trend lately with UCLA. That's the kind of games they've been playing, and again, they didn't disappoint. This is definitely one of those games where you might wonder, how far can UCLA go? But then you have to remember, they just keep winning these games. I don't see it changing at all in the coming weeks either. Washington, great defense, pretty bad offense, probably the same sort of thing. Stanford, same thing. So I think we're kind of strapping in for the long haul in terms of these ugly games. And, this game just definitely was not one of those that you really want to rewatch. I'm not exactly looking forward to it.
There were a lot of penalties, a lot of rough play by both offenses, but the key positive here for UCLA was its defense. Finally, I feel like this is the first time in 2 months where we're saying this defense played well. And after the game, we asked Jim and Jeff, hey, what went right with your defense? They're like, well, they finally were disciplined. They finally played in their gaps and everything. So the defense was kind of my key takeaway. Was that kind of yours as well?
Yeah, it was interesting because we talked so much about Arizona's multiple looks and how they had multiple options on every single play. Well, you couldn't even tell watching this game. The UCLA rarely looked confused. For a defense that has struggled so much with discipline, they actually did even better than a normal team would expect to do against a somewhat simple but still complicated look in terms of how many options that Arizona's offense had. They held a new Solomon. He had easily his worst game as a collegiate player. They held him to 18 of 48 for 175 yards and a touchdown. And it was even worse in the first half. He got better in the second. The run game, which had been one of the better ones in the Pac-12, they only managed a net of 80 yards. Between their two good running backs. At that point, you definitely have to give credit to UCLA's defense in this one. The defensive backs played man. I thought they had probably their best performance of the year. There was pressure on the quarterback. Solomon never looked comfortable the entire time. And I know they only finished with 2 sacks, but there were a lot of other plays where you could tell that he just made it out without being sacked. At this point, I'm not sure if that's sustainable. I guess that's really the question going forward. Can UCLA's defense put it all together like this, on a every week basis? I know they said it was good to kind of get that under their belt, that finally they know what it looks like when everyone starts doing their jobs. I think that definitely helps for young guys, but until we see it 2 weeks in a row, it's really hard to count on a defense that has had some good performances or decent performances, and then it just kind of slipped into the same undisciplined style of play.
Yeah, that'll be the question going forward: is can this defense keep it up? But the other question going forward will be Brett Hundley's play tonight. There was at times he looked honestly like a wildcat quarterback. He looked one read and then was gone. He was taken off. And Noel, we talked to Noel and Bull Jim after the game, and they both said, not all of those and probably a lot of those were not design runs. That's just what he does now. So it worked tonight against Arizona, but man, I can't imagine it's going to work Washington and Arizona or USC and Stanford and then in the bowl game or whatever in the Pac-12 title game. You got to have a quarterback throw the ball, right?
It was interesting because he talked about this after the game that to start the season, he thought that he needed to pass more because that's what NFL teams were expecting. They wanted to see some kind of development out of his arm, and he was kind of putting pressure on himself in those situations, which I thought was pretty honest of him to talk about. And he just kind of has realized in the last few weeks, well, I just need to do what I need to do for this team to win, and that's been running a lot of the time. But at the same time, you have, like you said, you have to wonder if that's sustainable. Same thing. It's interesting because in the first 32 games of his career, he had only 2 games of more than 16 carries. In the last 4, he has 3 games. 3 games he's passed that mark. At this point, I'm not sure if you just kind of roll with it. If you think, obviously he's running for a lot of yards. I mean, he's got another 100-yard game under his belt. They won this game. If you can count on your defense to hold down an offense like this, then maybe you can count on it. But I do agree at some point he needs to make some throws. He did have one solid throw tonight, 70-yard touchdown to Jordan Payton, which made it, ironically, in a game as inconsistent as this, tied him for the all-time touchdown lead in UCLA history with Cade McNown. But, he needs to be more of a dual threat, not just that one threat with his legs.
Going forward, they got 3 big games left at Washington, and then at home against USC and Stanford, and then who knows what the Pac-12 South title or Pac-12 title game is going to look like in the Pac-12 South winner. So, big picture-wise, what did this win tonight do for you and your opinion of the Bruins?
I think it was huge just because of the defense. I know that's been the biggest question mark for a long time. We weren't sure what to expect out of the young players, and it was interesting, especially I thought when we were asking about Eric Kendricks and how he didn't really have any tackles at the beginning of the game, and he was pretty quiet throughout. And Jim Moore and Jeff Ulbrich both kind of laughed, just saying that, well, that's because he didn't have to do everyone else's job, basically. And I think if you can keep these guys doing their jobs, and you're going to be able to keep in games, at least in these last 3. At this point, though, I think it's still a question mark. I mean, you can't play these ugly games and not, shed that kind of question mark status. So they're still alive. I mean, this win kept them in the Pac-12 title race, as much as some of us who have watched every game may be surprised by that, given their play in some of these games. But they're still alive, and at the end of the day, that's all that really matters.
That'll do it for our coverage here at the Rose Bowl. As always, you can follow Ryan's coverage of UCLA on Twitter at Ryan_Karchi. You can follow me on Twitter at EdwardLewisBSR. Until the next time, thanks for tuning in to the Cover 2 Recap.